This week's edition of WWE Raw was another taped episode, which we know has kind of been the theme during the holiday season, and was not the most noteworthy edition of the show, but we all know it's sort of gearing up towards that January 6th Raw on Netflix debut, and that was kind of what pushed us towards that after the main event on this show, where it was Drew McIntyre defeating Sami Zayn. Then we had Solo Sikoa's version of Bloodline get involved elsewhere on the show. We also had the New Day continuing to get incredible reactions from the fans. Seth Rollins had a big message for CM Punk and some other stuff as well that we'll mention. But let's start with what happened after the main event. It was Drew McIntyre moving to 10-0 in his career against Sami Zayn, as Joe Tessitore pointed out on commentary. That's just an absurd record for Drew McIntyre, but he does stay unbeaten. We know he comes off a win against Sami at Saturday night's main event. Gets another win here on this show. But it was really kind of continuing that story we talked about after SmackDown, was you had Drew McIntyre confronting Solo Sikoa, bringing up the past history between those two. But for now, they're going to work together until it's time for Drew to come all the way back around and give Solo his for what he did to cost him at Clash at the Castle a couple years ago in his opportunity at the WWE Undisputed / Universal Championship at the time. And so this was one where you kind of had, a different setup here where McIntyre gets the win. Solo comes out to get a little bit more shine as we head towards that match with Roman Reigns, Tribal Combat, January 6th, Raw on Netflix. And that was really the story here, was Solo Sikoa standing tall. And I said recently, I think that's clearly the direction they're going in, right? They want to give you the thought that Solo has a chance to beat Roman Reigns here. I think the only way Solo Sikoa has a chance to beat Roman Reigns in that match for the Ulafala is going to be if there is some significant interference, and whether that has to do with Jacob Fatu, The Rock, or someone else. But I think that's the only shot that Solo has of keeping this Ulafala, because as I've talked about before, I think the story really starts to go in another direction once Solo loses that, and then we start to see how that impacts his version of the Bloodline, how they react to him, whether it's Jacob Fatu, the Tongans, whoever, and when does that eventually get The Rock into the fold, perhaps to realize he is the final boss for Roman Reigns at some point down the road. Clearly, maybe not so much in the short term like we thought months ago, but still, you've got to think that's going to be part of the story at some point. But this was really, again, Solo taking out Jey Uso. He made his return on this show. Not surprising when you knew you were going to get the one-on-one match between McIntyre and Zayn. But having Solo take out Jey, that's where we're going to see, what Roman Reigns does on these next couple shows before we get to that big Raw on Netflix debut a couple weeks from now. And I think that was really what they were going for here, is just continuing to make Solo look strong, building him back up after Survivor Series, the loss at War Games, and all that. So I think now it's really just a matter of trying to build him into someone, again, who you think can keep this Ulafala in a one-on-one match against Roman Reigns, even though I think the chances of that happening are very slim for Solo right now. But this was the story they were trying to push on this episode of Raw. And like I mentioned, I do like the fact that they are continuing to tie these people in, whether it is Drew McIntyre and Solo, just the historical elements with everybody and how it continues to circle around with the Bloodline and how people are just, kind of in this universe now with this particular group. And, we know there are going to be more interactions between Drew McIntyre and Solo Sikoa in the future. But for now, they have a common goal, and that's trying to take out Roman Reigns. And you had the promo from Drew. I thought the promo exchange between Drew McIntyre and Sami Zayn was fantastic, because you had Drew pointing out the fact that, making it very clear that anyone in this circle of Roman Reigns is going to basically need to sleep with one eye open, as he said, because he's going to be coming after them. And so that's kind of the story here with Drew. And look, that's the same thing Solo wants, right? So they have the common goal now. And now we just see, what's that going to mean long-term for Jey Uso and Sami Zayn? Like, these two guys who we know are going to continue to have each other's backs, and they had each other's backs here, but taken out by the Bloodline. And meanwhile, Drew just continuing to take aim at Roman Reigns and anyone else in that circle. It's the same goal, the same mission for Solo Sikoa and his version of the Bloodline. So I like that they're using that together now, coming off of, that interaction they had on SmackDown. And it makes sense after the next follow-up, after that, to have them, again, kind of play a factor for each other in this particular sequence here on this edition of Raw. So we'll see how Jey responds, how Sami Zayn responds, Jimmy Uso, Roman Reigns. There has to be some sort of response. We know leading into that tribal combat match. And my guess is that match will have some interference, and there are a lot of contenders right here as you start to look at everyone who could get involved in that match. It seems like it's something that's going to happen. You're used to that in these kind of matches. I don't know that it'll just be one-on-one with no one on the outside having any say whatsoever in how this match turns out. But, hey, it's a bloodline match with stakes, and usually when that happens, you're going to have some shenanigans somewhere along the way. But we'll see how it plays out with that. But again, not really the biggest noteworthy thing that moved this story forward here, just simply having Solo look stronger and stronger. That is what they're going for, I think, heading into that match in a couple weeks. But as I mentioned, Drew McIntyre and Sami Zayn continuing their thing, and, we'll see what Sami does coming out of this as well. But the other big match we know it's going to happen on that Raw on Netflix show is going to be Seth Rollins versus CM Punk. And you had the sit-down interview here, just like you had the week before with Jackie Redmond and CM Punk. This one was Jackie Redmond and Seth Rollins, and it was basically Rollins once again pointing out when he saw CM Punk and Roman Reigns, inside that cage at War Games, like it made him sick, and he wanted to be able to just basically, what does he say, kind of cut this demon out of his soul or something like that, I think was the wording that Seth Rollins used here, and also, teasing the fact that he's about to do something that the fans have never seen before, right? They've never seen this sort of thing play out. And so that's kind of what they're going for here, is to push the idea that Seth Rollins is about to take this thing to another level based on the stakes that are involved in this match. Like, this isn't a tribal combat match, right? It's not something where you have an Ula Fala on the line or something like that. But the stakes have never been higher for Seth Rollins based on the way that he's telling the story with CM Punk because of the history and Punk making his decision to return to WWE and all of this, right? Punk being the ultimate hypocrite, as he said. Punk needed WWE. WWE didn't need Punk. And those kind of things that Rollins continues to push. And so I am intrigued now to see what he means by he's going to take this to a different level, right? Something they've never seen. They've never seen this side of Seth Rollins before. That's what you want, because now you're a little intrigued. You want to get a little more invested in what these two guys are going to do to each other, because this is such a big match. As we said, the prediction all along was that this was going to be a match that would take place at WrestleMania 41. Now, we're not so sure, because as we talked about in a previous video, it seems to be the direction could be Roman Reigns and CM Punk, based on the reaction, with all the interactions they've had and the millions upon millions of social media views and everything they've touted between those two, right? And so, if that's the case, that leaves questions as for what's next for Rollins heading into WrestleMania 41, but we know this match right here is going to tell us a lot about what does eventually happen once we get to the biggest show of the year, because however this plays out, it's going to play a significant role in that. And so I do think it's something where, this match obviously has to deliver for a lot of different reasons, but it is going to be huge for both of these guys in particular, because it's going to tell us a lot about what their, next 2 months, next 6 months maybe could look like, knowing that both of them are probably going to get into a championship picture, a world championship, title picture at some point. And so how does it all kind of get back there, and how does it continue to evolve around Roman Reigns and the Bloodline? Because that's really what a lot of this, as we said, is sparked here, and that will certainly be the case if Punk does wind up facing Reigns at WrestleMania 41. And then, what will Rollins is, kind of spot? These are all things that I think are very valid questions, but there is a lot more interest now as you get ready to do this match on the biggest Raw in history, the biggest television show, in terms of just the importance of what this show is going to mean for WWE. And yeah, it's just going to be a fantastic show, and I think they're definitely, continuing to push this as sort of the match that is a must-see attraction here, outside of, certainly the one with Tribal Combat. We know Rhea Ripley and Liv Morgan are going to face off, but this is a huge one because this is kind of, what many people thought could be a WrestleMania 41 headline type match. Night one, something like that. If you thought you were getting some kind of combination between Cody, Roman Reigns, and The Rock on night two, that was the initial thought. Maybe that's not the direction now. You do it here, and you go all out to make this a special match, and then we see what the consequences are for whoever wins or whoever loses, right? And so I liked a serious Seth Rollins here. No joking, no playing around. Like, this is for him everything, because he hates CM Punk and the history between the two. He has no choice but to rid himself and WWE of CM Punk. So that seems to be what we're kind of selling going into that big match here in a couple weeks between those two. But elsewhere on this week's Raw, I like the fact that they continue to kind of, have all these different segments where you have the New Day with Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods. There were several of them on the show, and it's just they are still trying to figure out, what did we do wrong here? Like, they continue to believe they're in the right, and I always say that's what, you like about these kind of heels, and why they can be really effective is because they are so sold on the idea that what they're telling you and what they think is right, and they can't kind of see beyond that because, there is maybe a little bit of truth in there to it, even though this is a little bit different, let's say the Kevin Owens situation with Cody Rhodes and that kind of stuff, but it's just having these guys not really understanding why people are so turned off by what they did to Big E, because in their minds, what Big E did to them is much worse, right? And they had every justification for doing that to their former New Day partner. And so I think it is a lot of good stuff they're doing right now with these guys, because you're getting the crowd reaction you want, right? We talk about that Dominic Mysterio type reaction. I love the fact that they had them interacting with Dominic on this show. Even Dominic's like, hey, I didn't like Big E, but that was crazy, right? So if you get that kind of interaction with Dominic, the fans are giving him, New Day the Dominic treatment now. That's kind of what you want. And so, yeah, I continue to like the way they're doing this. They're not having to necessarily do a whole lot right now with them. They're just embracing the reaction that you're going to get, because Big E is such a lovable figure for all the reasons we know. And so, just bask in that for a while. Just allow that reaction to what they did to him and why it was so stunning and shocking. Let that continue to be the story here. And they don't really have to do a whole lot. Like I said, certainly it'll start to get into the point to where they're going to wrestle more matches, and eventually, probably going to be right there in the tag team title scene. But for now, just let it keep going the way it is, and just let people react and get their hatred out for this group, for what they did to, Big E. And so, yeah, I love the way they continue to do this with these guys, and I just think it's going to get better from here, honestly, based on, kind of the way they're setting everything up. But good stuff from the New Day once again here. Elsewhere on the show, again, there was not necessarily a lot here on this, really just everything else. You had IYO Sky advance in the Women's Intercontinental title tournament. That was probably to be expected after she subbed in for Kairi Sane. You had Sonya Deville try to make the argument that she should be subbed in. Adam Pearce wasn't having it. He puts IYO Sky in there, so she's going to advance now with Lyra Valkyria. Winners coming out of that next week. That was announced. You also had some other stuff announced, next week. You're going to have Damian Priest, who got the win over Dominic here via DQ. Kind of a running theme with a couple of these matches, but Damian Priest faced Dominic. You get Judgment Day interfering after Priest, finds Santa Claus in the front row, winds up being JD McDonough, finds Carlito underneath the ring. Finn Balor attacks to cause the DQ, but then you have the War Raiders coming out. So kind of a natural progression there with the War Raiders, kind of being able to play into that sort of role as sort of, the people who can kind of form an alliance here with Damian Priest based on the fact that they just beat Balor and JD for the tag team title. So we're going to get the 6-man tag next week. Gives these guys something to do, not a lot more other than that. You really have a lot of Liv Morgan on this show. We talk about people who are not on this show, right? Not really Rhea Ripley, like Gunther, like these are kind of your top figures. Braun Breaker, Ludwig Kaiser, and that's why when you get these double tapings, you're going to see it play out this way sometimes, where you just kind of have, all right, there's going to be a group that's kind of your featured group on this show, and then the next show, maybe it's a different featured group. And so, you're going to have some overlap in there, of course, but that's kind of what this show felt like. And so, you had some advancement there, gives you the 6-man tag next week, so at least sets that up. And then speaking of more interference, you had that in the match between The Miz and Dexter Lumis. Final Testament gets involved to force the DQ there. And then you get the Wyatt Six coming out, so would assume you're going to get more there, more multi-person versions of these kind of matches as well with that particular group. So yeah, that was kind of the running theme here. Again, this was a taped episode. Like there are some taped episodes you can just say, hey, you don't even have to know it, and you can just sort of see the way it flows. Like this was just one of those. And there was, kind of knowing that your audience is usually down this time of year. This will probably not be the highest rated Raw just in terms of viewership because people are out doing holiday stuff, all that. And so they're not going to give you, the full goods here, right? They're going to hold some stuff back, and as we know, they're holding a lot of stuff back for 2 weeks from now on Netflix. But at least we'll see kind of next week if we get anything significant advancing us towards that. They're going to do a hard sell next week just on that show to make sure everyone knows, what is to come, and just doing that final huge build. You're going to have Punk and Seth Rollins there under one roof, as they're, I think, phrasing it next week. You're also going to have, and also on this show, Chad Gable to Tozawa. Not, a huge surprise there, but we're going to get that big one-on-one match. Chad Gable and Otis, if you've been waiting months and months for it, you're going to get it next week on that show. So, everything was just sort of advancing you a little bit towards next week's show. I mean, there's some key matchups, tournament matches, and we talked about the six-man tag and such, but really everything we know is just set in motion now for Netflix on January the 6th. And so that's where we are with Raw at this moment. And, it's probably going to be the same way with SmackDown. They're not switching, networks or anything. We've already got the USA Network, but you're going to have SmackDown expanding to 3 hours too. So 3 hours, however long Raw goes, I would assume they're going to go 3 hours too when they get to Netflix, although it's going to be a little bit more open-ended likely because it's not it's not your basic cable show where you're doing commercials every this or that. So you kind of have a lot more leeway, you would think, with this particular Netflix venture. And then, of course, again, SmackDown's going to go to 3 hours. So you're holding some stuff off until we get to that starting in the new year. So if you look at these shows and say, these probably aren't the biggest shows, well, you're not wrong because I think they're holding some stuff back. And I think that's where we're going to get, like I said, we're going to start to see, who are going to be the big faces of the Royal Rumble. You're going to start to see like this Judgment Day thing between Finn Balor and Liv Morgan, this battle seemingly for the leadership role. That's going to play out more. And the same stuff, like we mentioned on Raw with some of the storylines, SmackDown too. So it'll start to pick up at the first of the year, kind of that holiday lull sometimes you're going to get. But it's just a basic, numbers thing. You're not going to have as many people watching, so you don't want to give everything away, and certainly not this year with Raw and Netflix in the works. So there you go, guys. Just some thoughts on this week's Raw. If you did watch this show, what did you think of this week's Raw? As always, be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Always appreciate the feedback. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that like button on the way out. Lots more fun videos on your way here on the channel. So always appreciate your support of what we do here at Wrestling Reaction. But again, guys, appreciate you watching as always. Hope you have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and let me know your thoughts on this week's edition of WWE Raw.